it's not just the virtual meeting versus the face-to-face meeting, but it's that whole buying and problem-solving experience.
Welcome back. John Smybert with Dave Brock. Good day, Dave. How are you?
Very well. How are you, John?
Doing great. Looking forward to this subject. Now, after our last discussion on the future of sales, and you talked about the future being focused on the buyer, and we've got to really look at how the buyers buy, not how we sell, before we decide how we sell. That was a great discussion, but we didn't raise the elephant in the room, COVID. And I've had somebody come back and say, but you know, COVID is impacting all of us and the way we sell and the way we buy and so on. What's your thoughts about COVID on top of that conversation we had the other day about the future of sales?
See, if I look at it, if I look at kind of before COVID, and after COVID, and all the stuff that we talked about in our last conversation existed before COVID. As we started looking at what the future of selling is, what the future of buying is, how we help the customer in their true struggle through their buying journey and help them make sense, get greater confidence in their decisions and so on, is all what COVID did. Is COVID created this artificial forcing function that brought both all our weaknesses and strengths right into our face in a way that we couldn't escape it. COVID created this function that said, we have to change. We have to look at things differently. All of a sudden, things like our marketplaces changed. You know, we have had certain marketplaces like hospitality and transportation that were profoundly impacted. We had small businesses profoundly impacted, but it changed the way everybody was looking at things and gave us the opportunity to, or forced us to have the opportunity to reinvent ourselves. The customers reinventing what they did, how they did it, and we reinventing that whole process and how we engaged it. So, you know, part of it is how do we go from face-to-face to virtual, but I don't think that's the whole thing.
I mean, people tend to focus on the virtual side of it, but you're saying it's much more than that. The whole world of the buyer, we talked earlier in the previous discussion about the complexity and a whole lot of other issues around that buyers have been facing before COVID. All COVID, what you're saying is all COVID has done is really put the spotlight on that and highlighted the fact that we really should have been thinking about changing a long time before COVID.
Well, exactly. But before COVID, everybody was talking kind of casually about digital business transformation, but we kind of nodded our head and said, yeah, but we didn't really do anything. COVID forced us to confront realistically business transformation in all our business, digital business transformation in all our businesses, our customers' businesses, our business, how we operate internally, how we execute things, and how do we rely on multiple different kinds of new processes for getting work done. And so what COVID forced, I think, really accelerated that digital business transformation. As a result, it accelerated the change in the way buyers buy, and it accelerated the change in how we need to engage customers differently. And so it was less kind of, to me, the transformation COVID has brought is less one of conducting meetings over Zoom or over Teams or over some sort of virtual kind of meetings at a distance, but really transformed this how we do business in how we solve problems together with our customers. And virtual meetings is just a small part of it, but the rest of it is encompassed in what do we really mean by digital business transformation.
And you know, engagement with customer is not just the fact we're doing it on Zoom or Teams or whatever. Right. Whether we're doing it in the room with the customer or via Zoom, it's the way in which we're engaging that we really have the changes driven in.
And it's engaging them in different new and novel ways. It's engaging them through our websites and our digital content in interesting ways. It's thinking about, I had a conversation a few months ago with a very famous professor. He was actually a professor in psychology at one of the big US universities. And he said, what we don't realize is, and I think the number is somewhere around 82% of communication is nonverbal. And I said, well, doesn't Zoom do that? And he says, well, you get some of the visual piece, but you don't get all the other signs. Remember, we use all our senses to engage people. So how do we solve problems in different ways, and how do we do things? So there are whole new sets of digital tools that are emerging. There are whole new sets of ways to engage customers that may not be salesperson to customer, maybe in a way that we're engaging each other, but leveraging, totally digital tools, whether leveraging AI, bots, and things like that, or just sources of information and sources of learning.
Conduits of passing information across or getting access to information and so on.
Exactly. And so now we've started saying there are more channels that we're engaged in. We knew that beforehand. We knew the customers are engaging us in something like 3.7 channels. And now that's become the way we do business commonly. So how do we coordinate our messaging across that? How do we help provide a richer communication experience to capture more of that 72% that's nonverbal, and part of it's through tools, part of it's through content, part of it's through problem-solving techniques. Part of it is how do we communicate with each other better, whether it's person to person, face to face, or virtually.
And the reality is, whether it's face to face or virtually, behind that, the methodologies we use to engage need to be quite different to what they might have been 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Yeah, and I think in terms of my own personal business, both in terms of selling and in terms of running projects with customers and so on, I used to have everybody in a room together. And, you used to say it wasn't so much what one person was saying, but you'd read the room. You'd look at the body language, the side conversations, the interaction, and you'd start to read the room and say, what's happening in here? And what do I need to do to move them from here to here? And so we're having to figure out new ways of doing this, and customers are having to figure out, they sit in rooms by themselves. And they do the same thing we do, is they read the room, they look at the body language, they look at the side conversations and so on, and say, that's part of the problem solving process. That's part of the buying process. How do we do that in this new world?
Dave, let's summarize to close off this conversation. So if I was a sales director of a company right now, and I've been struggling a little bit, my teams haven't been very effective through COVID, and I need to really start thinking about doing things differently, if I haven't already. What's the bottom line? What would you recommend they focus on doing? Summarize.
So I'd really look at a couple of things. One is, it's not just the virtual meeting versus the face-to-face meeting, but it's that whole buying and problem-solving experience. So what tools do we need to put in place for our buyers to use to help them navigate through the buying process? What content do we need to put in place? What do we need the customer to learn through each one of these channels, and how do we create a customer experience consistent across those, whether it's you and I engaging each other either face-to-face or at a distance? And I know that you've used some tools that we have at our site, that you have some content that you may have talked to some other discussion groups. How do I have a consistent experience across those channels and help you move forward to the next step?
And behind all that, as you mentioned, it's the buying journey, and we're going to be looking at different content and different messages at different stages through that buying journey, right? Which sometimes people forget. They chuck the content at them when the content was more applicable later in the buying journey than earlier or whatever.
Yeah, and if I don't hope you don't mind me taking an extra moment. That when we've been going through COVID, there are some interesting things that I saw that were really unique and remarkable that were in kind of the B2C world or things like that. You found like artists couldn't go to stadiums and hold concerts and things like that anymore. So how did they make money? Well, they got themselves embedded in games like Fortnite. And there were opportunities actually in that Fortnite experience to start engaging in buying things and getting services in a new and different way. And you start thinking about these are technologies that are really engaging buyers in a different way. How do we look at, maybe this sounds really whacked out, but Fortnite for B2B selling?
Okay. Some good suggestions there. I think good value for sales leaders that are all struggling in the COVID world. It's what we were looking at before COVID. It's just accelerated, and we need to get some of that stuff in place. Dave, really appreciate the discussion. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.